It's story time.
Halloween was always a big deal in our small town. Every year, the community would come together to create a haunted house experience that attracted visitors from far and wide. It was an event we looked forward to all year long. And this time, we were determined to make it through the haunted house without screaming like little kids. My friends and I, Emma, Jake, and Lily, had been planning this night for weeks. We'd coordinated our costumes, practiced our bravest faces, and even rehearsed our best horror movie screams. We were ready to conquer our fears and earn our haunted house badges of honor. As we approached the dilapidated building that served as the haunted house's entrance, a sense of foreboding washed over us. Its facade was covered in fake cobwebs, and eerie red lights illuminated the path to the ticket booth. The line of excited thrill seekers stretched out ahead of us. "Remember," Jake said, trying to sound brave, "we've got to stay calm and act like nothing scares us." We all nodded in agreement, but I could see the nervous glances we exchanged. The anticipation was getting to us. Finally, it was our turn to enter. The ticket seller grinned wickedly as he tore our tickets in half. His costume was impressively spooky, dressed as a deranged clown with jagged teeth and a sinister laugh. He was the perfect greeter for this night of frights. As we stepped inside, we were plunged into darkness. Our only guide was a dimly lit path marked by glowing arrows. Spooky sounds echoed around us, ghostly moans, rattling chains, and eerie whispers. We moved forward with our hands on each other's shoulders, shuffling carefully. The haunted house was an intricate maze of horrors. At every turn, gruesome scenes played out before us, zombies lunging from behind hidden doors, ghouls jumping out from concealed corners, and sinister clowns wielding chainsaws. But we were determined to keep our cool. We laughed off the jump scares even when a ghastly figure lunged at us from a hidden trapdoor. It was all in good fun, we thought. Then we reached a particularly eerie room. The air was thick with fog, and a solitary spotlight illuminated a gruesome surgical setup. A figure in a blood-stained lab coat hovered over an operating table, his back to us. His movements were slow and deliberate as he held a bloodied instrument. As we cautiously approached, Emma whispered, "This is amazing. They've really outdone themselves this year." The figure on the operating table suddenly jerked to life, letting out a guttural, tortured scream. We all screamed in response, but our laughter followed quickly. Then, to our shock, the man in the lab coat turned around. His face was a grotesque mask of madness, his eyes filled with a wild, unhinged glare. "Get out!" he shrieked, his voice trembling with fury. We stumbled backward, tripping over each other in our haste to escape the room. The once calm atmosphere had taken a horrifying turn. As we sprinted through the maze of horrors, we realized that something was terribly wrong. The actors in the haunted house were breaking character, their faces twisted into expressions of genuine terror. They were fleeing from us, screaming for their lives. We burst out of the haunted house and into the cool night air, gasping for breath. We were greeted by the bewildered stares of the other visitors, who had also fled in panic. "What just happened?" Jake panted, his face ashen. "I have no idea," Lily replied, her voice trembling. "That guy in the lab coat, he wasn't an actor. He was a real madman." We watched as the haunted house staff scrambled to call the police. It turned out that the man in the lab coat had somehow infiltrated the haunted house, hiding among the actors until the moment he revealed himself. We were interviewed by the police, and our statements helped them piece together what had happened. The man had a history of mental illness and had managed to slip past security, blending in with the performers. His rampage through the haunted house had been a nightmarish ordeal for all of us. As we headed home that night, the adrenaline still coursing through our veins, we couldn't help but feel that we'd experienced something truly terrifying. The haunted house had taken on a life of its own, a place where the lines between reality and fiction blurred, and the horrors we encountered were. I had always been fascinated by the supernatural, drawn to stories of ghosts and hauntings like a moth to a flame. So when I heard about Hollow Manor, an old abandoned house rumored to be the most haunted in the town, I couldn't resist the temptation to explore its mysteries. It was a chilly autumn evening when I embarked on my adventure. The moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie glow over the decrepit mansion. Its dilapidated facade loomed before me, an imposing silhouette against the night. The story went that the original owner, Mr. Holloway, had died under mysterious circumstances, and ever since, the house had been plagued by restless spirits. My heart pounded with excitement and trepidation as I stepped through the creaking front door. The air inside was thick with the scent of decay, and dust motes danced in the dim light filtering through cracked windows. Cobwebs adorned every corner, as if the house itself had been frozen in time. I cautiously made my way through the echoing halls, my footsteps reverberating through the empty spaces. The silence was oppressive, broken only by the occasional gust of wind that rattled the loose shutters and whispered through the gaps in the walls. As I explored further, I began to feel a growing unease, as if unseen eyes were watching my every move. It was as though the very walls of the house were alive with a malevolent presence. The first sign that something was amiss came in the form of a flickering candle in one of the long abandoned rooms. I approached it cautiously, my heart pounding. No draught could explain the inexplicable dance of the flame, and I felt a chill run down my spine. Then came the whispers, soft, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to emanate from the very walls themselves. I strained to make out the words, but they remained elusive, like secrets whispered in the wind. The sensation of being watched intensified, and I couldn't shake the feeling that I was not alone in that forsaken place. It was as though the spirits of Hollow Manor were stirring, awakening from their long slumber. I decided to venture into the basement, where the stories suggested Mr. Holloway had met his untimely end. The stairs creaked ominously with each step I took, and the air grew colder and heavier. The basement was a vast, shadowy expanse, illuminated only by the feeble glow of my flashlight. Suddenly, a bone-chilling gust of wind rushed past me, extinguishing my light and plunging me into darkness. Panic welled up within me as I fumbled for my flashlight, my fingers trembling. When I finally managed to reignite the beam, I gasped in shock. Before me stood a figure, a spectral apparition dressed in tattered clothing, its face contorted in agony. It bore a striking resemblance to the portraits I had seen of Mr. Holloway. I stood frozen in terror as the ghostly figure reached out towards me, its fingers passing through my flesh as if I were nothing but air. It let out a mournful wail that seemed to reverberate through my very soul. In that moment, I understood the true nature of Hollow Manor. It wasn't just a haunted house. It was a sanctuary for lost souls, trapped in a never-ending cycle of torment and despair. I made a hasty retreat from the basement, my heart pounding like a drum. The house seemed to come alive around me, with whispers growing into anguished cries and shadows darting in the periphery of my vision. Back in the main hall, I stumbled upon an old journal, the diary of Mr. Holloway himself. Its pages revealed a tale of greed, betrayal, and a gruesome murder that had taken place within these very walls. The ghostly figure I had encountered was none other than Mr. Holloway himself, forever condemned to wander his cursed abode. With newfound determination, I decided to put the restless spirit to rest. Armed with knowledge from the journal, I embarked on a quest to uncover the truth behind Mr. Holloway's murder and the identity of his betrayer. Days turned into weeks as I delved into the town's history, digging up long-forgotten records and interviewing elderly residents who remembered the dark days of Hollow Manor. Gradually, the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, and I discovered the shocking truth. The murderer was none other than Mr. Holloway's own brother, driven by jealousy and greed. With this revelation in hand, I returned to Hollow Manor, determined to confront the vengeful spirit and offer him the closure he so desperately needed. Armed with the journal and the truth, I ventured once more into the haunted depths of the house. The specter appeared before me once more, his mournful eyes locking onto mine. I spoke to him, recounting the tale of his tragic demise and revealing the identity of his murderer. As I finished, the ghostly figure seemed to waver, its form growing fainter. The anguished expression on its face slowly transformed into one of acceptance and peace. With a final, sad smile, it faded away, leaving behind only a sense of serenity. Hollow Manor was finally free of its restless spirits, and the malevolence that had hung over the house dissipated like morning mist. As I walked away from that forsaken place, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment and closure. It was the crisp autumn evening that our group of friends had been eagerly awaiting. Halloween was just around the corner, and in our small town, the highlight of the season was the annual corn maze at Harvest Hollow. The rumors surrounding it had always added to the allure. It was said that eerie, unexplained events often occurred within its towering walls of maze. As we arrived at the entrance of the maze, excitement crackled in the air. The corn stood tall, casting long shadows in the waning daylight. The maze's entrance was adorned with spooky decorations, jack-o'-lanterns, skeletons, and scarecrows leering ominously. It was the perfect setup for a night of. I was with my three closest friends, Sarah, Mike, and Lisa. We had all grown up in this town, and the legends of Harvest Hollow were as familiar to us as the streets we walked every day. It was this familiarity that made us feel invincible as we ventured into the maze. The twisting corridors of corn were disorienting from the very beginning. Tall stalks loomed overhead, obscuring our view of the moonlit sky. The only sounds were the rustling of the leaves and our own nervous laughter. As we navigated the maze's intricate pathways, we couldn't help but be captivated by the eerie ambience. It felt like we had been transported to another world, one where anything could happen. Our adventure took a sudden and chilling turn when we heard distant whispers, soft, ghostly voices that seemed to come from all directions. We exchanged nervous glances, trying to discern the source, but the corn walls provided no clues. Suddenly, figures emerged from the darkness, ghoulish, masked figures dressed in tattered clothing and wielding rusty farming tools. Panic swept through us as we realized that they were chasing us through the maze. "Run!" I screamed, and we took off in different directions, each of us trying to lose our pursuers in the labyrinthine corn. The maze seemed to twist and change, its pathways shifting like living, breathing corridors. I could hear my friends' screams and the unnerving laughter of our pursuers echoing through the maze. Desperation clawed at my chest as I ran blindly through the corn, praying to find an exit or a familiar face. The wind carried the haunting voices of the masked figures as they continued their relentless pursuit. Finally, I stumbled upon Sarah, her face pale with terror. We clung to each other, trying to catch our breath as the sinister figures closed in. We knew we had to find the others and escape this nightmare. We found Mike next, crouched behind a wall of corn. He had lost his glasses in the chaos, and his eyes were wide with fear. Lisa was nowhere to be seen, and we couldn't waste any more time searching for her. We regrouped and made a desperate dash for the maze's exit. It felt like the corn walls were closing in around us, as if the very maze itself was conspiring against our escape. When we burst through the exit, Gasping for breath, we were met by the concerned faces of the corn maze's owners, Mr. and Mrs. Anderson. They were a kindly elderly couple who had been running Harvest Hollow for decades. "What happened in there?" Mrs. Anderson asked, her eyes filled with worry. "We were chased by people in costumes," I stammered. "They were trying to scare us." The Holloways exchanged glances, their expressions growing somber. "There shouldn't have been anyone in the maze with you," Mr. Anderson said, his voice grave. "We closed it off for the night, and we never have actors chasing visitors in there. It's always been a family-friendly attraction." Our blood ran cold as we realized the implications of their words. If those figures in the maze hadn't been actors, then who or what had been chasing us through the labyrinth of corn? The Andersons assured us that they would investigate the matter thoroughly and ensure our safety. We left Harvest Hollow that night, shaken to our core by the unexplained terror we had encountered. Days passed, and the Holloways couldn't find any evidence of unauthorized personnel in the maze that night. There were no signs of break-ins, and the security footage showed no one entering the area after closing time. The incident left us with more questions than answers. What had we encountered in that maze? Had we stumbled upon something beyond our understanding, a supernatural force that dwelled within the corn?